Eddie Sanders completed his pre-flight checks in silence, each movement deliberate, under the watch of armed Marines positioned at every corner of the hangar. Their fingers rested near triggers, orders explicit. If the Zero showed any sign of catastrophic failure, if Sanders attempted anything unauthorized, they were to open fire immediately. The aircraft was too valuable to risk losing in a fireball. The cockpit felt wrong in ways Sanders couldn't quite articulate. American fighters were built for larger men, farm boys from Iowa and factory workers from Detroit. The Zero's seat positioned him unnaturally forward, knees bent at sharper angles, the canopy closer to his head. Every surface felt lighter, thinner, as if constructed from materials that shouldn't bear the stress of combat flight. He studied the instrument panel with growing unease. The Japanese characters might as well have been hieroglyphics. Engineers had briefed him on the basic layout: airspeed indicator here, altimeter there, engine gauges clustered to the left. But in flight, when things happened fast, he'd be flying half-blind through a critical performance envelope. One misread dial could put him into a spin he couldn't recover from. The control stick felt disconcertingly light in his palm, almost delicate compared to the heavy American fighters he'd tested. Sanders wrapped his fingers around it experimentally, testing the resistance. Nothing. The ailerons moved with barely any pressure, the kind of hair-trigger responsiveness that promised either exceptional maneuverability or fatal oversensitivity. "We're clear for engine start," the chief mechanic called from outside the cockpit. Sanders hit the starter. The sake engine coughed once, then caught with a surprisingly smooth purr, quieter than the brutal roar of American radials, almost refined. He let it warm up while scanning the unfamiliar gauges, watching needles climb toward operating temperatures he could only estimate. Behind him, the hangar doors rolled open, revealing the morning sky over San Diego Bay. Guards stepped back, creating a clear path to the taxiway. This was it, the moment American intelligence had been desperately seeking since Pearl Harbor. For 16 months, the Zero had been a ghost, a phantom that appeared without warning and vanished before anyone could study it. American pilots returned from combat with stories that seemed impossible. A fighter that could outclimb, outturn, and outrun everything in the inventory. Now Sanders would learn whether those stories were true, or if fear had exaggerated the Zero's capabilities. Before we continue, click that subscribe button, like this video, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It brings me great joy knowing that these war stories and lessons get to people all over the world. Your support helps us bring more thrilling war stories, and trust me, you won't want to miss them. Now, let's get back to the story. He released the brakes and added power. The lightweight fighter rolled forward almost eagerly, responding to the slightest throttle input. Sanders taxied toward the runway, feeling the aircraft's every characteristic through the stick: sensitive, responsive, hungry for air. At the runway threshold, he locked the tailwheel and advanced the throttle to take off power. The sake engine wound up with barely a vibration, pulling the Zero forward with surprising acceleration. 50 knots, 60. At 70 knots, Sanders eased back on the stick. The Zero leapt into the air as if gravity had released its hold. In that moment, wheels leaving California soil, climbing into American airspace in Japan's most feared weapon, the Pacific Air War began to shift. Sanders had 60 minutes to find the cracks in the myth. June 4, 1942, Aleutian Islands, Alaska. Tadayoshi Koga felt invincible at 19. His Zero carved through the morning sky over Dutch Harbor with the effortless grace that had made Japan's naval fighters legendary. Below, American installations burned from the first wave of attacks. Koga and his wingmen, Chief Petty Officer Makoto Endo and Petty Officer Tsuguo Shikata, had already claimed a PBY Catalina, sending the lumbering patrol bomber spiraling into the harbor in flames. The Zero performed flawlessly, dancing through defensive fire with the kind of maneuverability American fighters couldn't match. Koga rolled into another strafing run, his 7.7mm machine guns stitching across ground targets with methodical precision. Then he felt the hit, a single sharp vibration through the airframe, so subtle he almost missed it. A .50 caliber round from a ground position had found its mark, punching through the Zero's thin aluminum skin and severing the oil return line. Koga didn't know it yet, but his war had just ended. Oil began spraying from the damaged line in a fine mist, coating the windscreen in dark streaks. The Sake engine temperature gauge climbed steadily toward the red line. 15 minutes, maybe less. Koga radioed his section leader, voice calm despite the sinking realization. Oil line damaged, breaking off for emergency landing. He turned east toward Akutan Island, 25 miles across open water. Japanese planners had designated it as an emergency recovery site. A submarine waited offshore. Everything would be fine. The island emerged from coastal fog, and Koga spotted salvation. A long stretch of flat grassland half a mile inland from Broad Bight. Perfect. He'd set down, wait for the submarine crew, and be back aboard Ryujo by evening with a story to tell. Above, Shikata circled protectively as Koga descended, landing gear lowering with mechanical precision. On his second orbit, Shikata noticed something wrong. Water glistening between the grass stalks, visible only from certain angles in the flat morning light. Not a field, a bog. He keyed his radio, shouting a warning, but Koga had already committed to the approach, too low and slow to abort. The Zero's wheels touched grass at 80 miles per hour. For one perfect second, the landing seemed successful. Then the main gear plunged through vegetation into knee-deep mud, catching with terrible finality. Physics became executioner. The lightweight fighter, tail still traveling at landing speed, cartwheeled forward in a violent flip. The aircraft slammed inverted into the bog with a sound like thunder across the empty island. The impact snapped Koga's neck with clinical efficiency. He died suspended upside down in his harness, pistol and sword still strapped to his waist, eyes open to a sky he'd never see again. Above, his wingmen faced an impossible choice. Orders were absolute. Destroy any downed Zero. Deny the enemy this prize. Endo and Shikata circled the crash site, machine guns armed, searching desperately for movement in the inverted cockpit. The aircraft looked so intact, sitting like a stranded turtle in the marsh, that neither could accept Koga was dead. What if he was alive, trapped, waiting for rescue? Could they murder their friend on mere suspicion? After 5 agonizing passes, fuel gauges falling toward empty bogs, they turned west and disappeared into the Aleutian fog. Their mercy would doom their air force. Koga's Zero sat alone in the bog, untouched, waiting to betray every secret of Japanese aerial supremacy to an enemy 5,000 miles away who didn't yet know it existed. July 10, 1942, Akutan Island. Lieutenant William Thias was lost, and in the Aleutians, that could be fatal. His PBY Catalina had been navigating by dead reckoning through soup-thick fog for nearly an hour. Magnetic compasses went haywire this close to the Arctic Circle. Landmarks vanished behind walls of cloud that rolled in without warning. Thies had burned through fuel he couldn't spare searching for a recognizable island chain. Then the fog broke. Below, the Shumagen Islands materialized through the gap, a landmark Thias recognized instantly. He corrected course for Dutch Harbor, choosing to fly directly over Akutan Island rather than around it. Every gallon of fuel mattered now. In the waste blister, machinist mate Albert Knack gazed absently at the landscape passing beneath. Endless marsh, scattered rocks, nothing worth noting. Then something caught his eye, a shape that didn't belong. angular lines where nature made curves, and red circles, unmistakable red circles. "Lieutenant!" Knack's voice cracked over the intercom. "Zero fighter, 10 o'clock low." Thies banked hard, bringing the PBY around for another pass. Through the break in the fog, the scene crystallized. A Japanese fighter sitting inverted in a marsh like some bizarre sculpture, wings intact, fuselage seemingly undamaged. The bright red Hinamaru emblems blazed against camouflage paint. Thies circled 3 more times, Knack frantically marking the position on charts while the window of visibility remained open. Then fog swallowed the sight again, as if it had never existed. Thies pushed the throttles forward, racing for Dutch Harbor. This wasn't just intelligence. This was a gift from the gods of war. Within 6 hours, a recovery team landed near the crash site. What they found exceeded every wild hope. The Zero had crashed in perhaps the only spot on Akutan Island where physics would preserve rather than destroy. The bog's soft surface had absorbed the impact like a massive shock absorber, dissipating forces that would have shattered the airframe on solid ground. Aside from crushed windscreen glass, bent propeller tips, and damaged landing gear, the aircraft remained fundamentally intact. Every secret, every weakness, every engineering compromise, preserved perfectly. The recovery team carefully removed Koga's body from the inverted cockpit, burying him with military honors on a hillside overlooking the crash site. Then the real work began. Extracting a fighter from an Aleutian bog required 3 weeks of brutal labor in perpetual damp cold. Workers constructed a makeshift road from logs and planking, winching the Zero across half a mile of treacherous marsh to Broad Bight. Equipment froze overnight. Ropes snapped in sub-zero temperatures. Men worked in shifts around the clock, knowing this aircraft was worth any hardship. By late July, the Zero sat aboard a cargo ship bound for San Diego, covered by tarps and guarded like crown jewels. At North Island Naval Air Station, engineers uncrated the fighter with trembling hands. They'd expected damage, compromises, reasons why combat evaluation might be limited. Instead, they found a complete, flyable example of Japan's most feared weapon. Chief Engineer Roy Grumman received the technical assessment by secure cable at his Long Island factory, where his team was finalizing designs for a new carrier fighter. The timing seemed almost supernatural. The cable's final line read, "Aircraft restored to flight status. Full performance testing authorized. This changes everything." In his office 3,000 miles east, Grumman read those words twice, then reached for the phone. His engineers needed to see this data the moment it arrived. The F6F Hellcat's final design phase had just received an unexpected gift, a complete blueprint of the enemy they were built to destroy. Sanders climbed through 5,000 feet, feeling the Zero's remarkable lightness in every control input. The aircraft seemed to float rather than fly, responding to the slightest touch with eager precision. He understood immediately why American pilots reported feeling outmatched. This thing moved like thought itself. Time to find the limits. He pushed the nose over into a shallow dive, watching the airspeed indicator climb. 150 knots. 170. The Zero remained stable, controls crisp and responsive. At 190 knots, Sanders attempted a sharp right aileron roll, standard evasive maneuver every American pilot practiced religiously. The stick went rigid. Sanders pulled harder, muscles straining against sudden resistance that felt like the controls had locked solid. The ailerons barely deflected. At 200 knots, the Zero's legendary maneuverability simply vanished, replaced by mushy, unresponsive controls that refused to roll the aircraft with any authority. He throttled back, letting speed bleed off. At 180 knots, the ailerons freed up again, responsive and light. Sanders keyed his radio to the chase plane. Note this: aileron control locks above 200 knots. Complete loss of roll authority at high speed. A fatal flaw. American fighters routinely fought above 250 knots. Any pilot who knew this could simply dive away from a Zero pursuit, and the Japanese fighter couldn't follow with the same roll rate. Sanders climbed back to altitude, mind racing with possibilities. What else had the myth obscured? He rolled inverted and pulled -G. Igipamshi, pushing the stick forward to test unusual attitudes. The Sake engine coughed once, then died completely. The propeller windmilled uselessly as the Zero became a glider at 8,000 feet. Sanders' heart hammered. He rolled upright immediately, positive G restored, and the engine caught again with a stuttering cough, surging back to life. He leveled off, hands shaking slightly. "Engine quits under -G, he radioed. "Fuel system cannot handle inverted flight or pushovers. Repeat, any -G maneuver kills the engine." Another fatal weakness. Dive away with a pushover, and the Zero's engine would starve for fuel while the pursuing pilot watched helplessly, unable to follow through the -G dive. Sanders continued his methodical dissection. He climbed to 15,000 feet and rolled into high-speed maneuvers, watching the fabric control surfaces carefully. Above 250 knots, the fabric covering on the ailerons and elevators began ballooning outward from air pressure, distorting their shape and degrading control effectiveness. The lightweight construction that made the Zero so maneuverable at low speeds became a liability. At combat velocities, he flew close formation with the chase plane, letting their gunner photograph the Zero's construction up close. What the cameras revealed was shocking. No armor plating behind the pilot's seat. No self-sealing fuel tanks. The airframe itself was built from aluminum so thin you could dent it with a thumb. The Zero wasn't just lightweight, it was fragile. A lightweight champion built from paper and prayers. Sanders landed after 90 minutes of flight testing, taxiing back to the hangar where engineers and intelligence officers waited with notebooks open. Before he'd even shut down the engine, they were swarming the aircraft, measuring, photographing, documenting. That evening, Sanders's report hit desks across the Pacific Fleet like a tactical atomic bomb. The Zero is inferior above 200 knots. -G kills engine. No armor. No protection. Fabric surfaces fail at high speed. Recommend immediate tactical revision. Never turn with a Zero. Always fight with speed and altitude advantage. Dive attacks with -G approach. High-speed rolling scissors. Within 48 hours, every fighter squadron in the Pacific received new tactical doctrine. The myth died in classified briefing rooms from Pearl Harbor to Guadalcanal. And at Grumman Aircraft, engineers absorbed every data point, refining their new fighter to exploit every weakness Sanders had exposed. The Hellcat was about to become a Zero killer by design. Grumman Aircraft Engineering Corporation, Bethpage, Long Island. Roy Grumman stood in the engineering bay, studying the F6F prototype with the intensity of a surgeon examining a patient mid-operation. His team had been developing this fighter for 8 months, refining, testing, iterating. The design was close, tantalizingly close, but not yet perfect. Then Sanders' report arrived from San Diego. Grumman read it 3 times, each pass revealing new possibilities. The Zero's weaknesses weren't just tactical intelligence, they were a blueprint for engineering dominance. And the timing was extraordinary. The Hellcat design wasn't locked yet. Critical systems remained flexible, open to modification. They had a window, and Grumman intended to exploit it ruthlessly. "Gentlemen," he addressed his engineering team, spreading Sanders' technical data across the conference table, "we now know exactly what we're hunting. Let's build the weapon that kills it." The aileron problem came first. Where the Zero used lightweight cable-operated controls that froze under high-speed air pressure, Grumman specified full hydraulic boost for the Hellcat's ailerons. Pilots would maintain crisp roll authority at any speed, 250 knots, 300 knots, even 350 knots in a dive. The Hellcat would roll when American pilots needed it to roll, no matter how fast they pushed it. The negative G engine failure demanded an elegant solution: a pressure carburetor system that maintained fuel flow regardless of aircraft attitude. Rolls, inverted flight, violent pushovers. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 Double Wasp would never starve for fuel. Hellcat pilots could dive away from Zeros with aggressive negative G maneuvers, knowing their 2,000 horsepower engine would keep screaming while their pursuer's Sake motor coughed and died. But Grumman's team went further than exploiting weaknesses. They built in overwhelming advantages. Where the Zero sacrificed protection for weight, the Hellcat became a fortress. Heavy armor plating surrounded the cockpit, behind the pilot's seat, beneath the seat, around the engine. Self-sealing fuel tanks absorbed bullet strikes without exploding. The airframe itself was constructed from thick aluminum, stressed to handle carrier landings and combat damage that would shatter a Zero's delicate structure. The Hellcat would bring its pilots home. 6 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 3 in each wing, gave the Hellcat firepower the Zero couldn't match. While Japanese pilots relied on 2 7.7mm machine guns and 2 20mm cannons with limited ammunition, Hellcat pilots would pour streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds into targets at 4,800 rounds per minute combined. Enough firepower to saw a Zero in half. The massive R2800 engine gave the Hellcat something else the Zero would never have: raw power. Where the Sake produced 940 horsepower, the Double Wasp roared with 2,000 horses, enough to haul the Hellcat's armored bulk to 380 miles per hour and climb at 3,500 feet per minute. Speed, protection, firepower. The Hellcat was being engineered as the Zero's natural predator. June 26, 1942. The XF6F3 prototype lifted off from Bethpage for its first flight. Test pilot Bob Hall pushed it through the performance envelope, and the results exceeded projections. Fast, tough, responsive. Grumman authorized immediate production. By 1943, the Bethpage factory had become a war machine operating at impossible intensity. Assembly lines ran 3 shifts. Workers riveted airframes around the clock. At peak production, a complete F6F Hellcat rolled off the line every 60 minutes, 1 per hour, 24 hours per day. 12,000 Hellcats would be built before war's end, and every single one carried Sanders' discoveries wired into its DNA. A fighter designed not just to fight the Zero, but to execute it. Naval Air Station, Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. January 1943. Commander John "Jimmy" Thack stood before a room packed with fighter pilots, a piece of chalk in his hand and Sanders' Zero report on the podium. These men had been fighting Zeros for over a year, watching friends die, burning through tactics that didn't work, learning through blood what the enemy could do. Now Thack was about to rewrite the rulebook. "Forget everything you thought you knew about fighting Zeros," he began, tapping the chalkboard where he'd drawn 2 aircraft silhouettes. "As of today, the Zero is no longer invincible. It's a target with known weaknesses, and we're going to exploit every single one." He sketched a diving attack profile. First rule: never ever turn with a Zero at low speed. Their turn radius will kill you every time, but above 200 knots, he circled the number, their ailerons lock up. They lose roll authority. You stay fast, you stay alive. Pilots leaned forward, scribbling notes furiously. Second, the Zero's engine cannot handle negative G. Thack drew an inverted aircraft with an X through the engine. You're in trouble? Push the stick forward into a negative G dive. Your engine keeps running. Theirs quits cold. They either have to roll upright and pull into a dive, losing seconds and position, or watch you escape while their prop windmills uselessly. A hand shot up. "What about the Hellcat, sir? How do we use it?" Thak smiled. "The Hellcat was built specifically to kill Zeros. Here's how you do it." He outlined the new tactical doctrine with surgical precision. Boom and zoom. Dive from altitude with speed advantage. Make one high-speed slashing attack with your 650 calibers. Don't turn to engage. Extend away in a climb. The Zero can't catch you with its locked ailerons and lower top speed. Reset altitude. Repeat. Thak weave. Fight in pairs, never alone. When a Zero gets on your tail, your wingman crosses behind you. The Zero either breaks off or flies into your wingman's gun sight. Mutual support. Always. Energy fighting. Maintain speed and altitude advantage religiously. The Hellcat has more power, more speed, better high-altitude performance. Trade that energy for position. Never give it away in turning dogfights. -G. Escape. If caught low and slow, push into a -G dive immediately. Your Hellcat's pressure carburetor keeps feeding fuel. The Zero's engine dies. Create separation. Regain energy. Re-engage on your terms. Armor confidence. The Hellcat can take punishment. You have armor plating, self-sealing tanks, and a radial engine that absorbs damage. The Zero has none of these. If caught in a head-on pass, don't flinch. Your aircraft will survive hits that would disintegrate a Zero. Thak stepped back from the board, surveying the room. The Japanese built an elegant machine optimized for 1941 combat. We've built a weapons system optimized to destroy it. Speed, power, protection, firepower. Use them. He picked up a training manual stamped "Confidential" and held it up. Every squadron transitioning to Hellcats gets this tactical guide. It's based on actual test flights of a captured Zero. Everything in here has been verified. These aren't theories. These are facts. A young pilot raised his hand. "Sir, what's our expected kill ratio with these tactics?" Thak paused, choosing his words carefully. In initial combat trials, properly trained Hellcat pilots are achieving approximately 3-to-1 kill ratios. As more squadrons transition and tactical experience grows, we expect that number to climb significantly. He didn't mention the internal Navy projections suggesting ratios could exceed 10-to-1. That seemed too optimistic to believe. Within 18 months, combat reality would make those projections look conservative. The revolution had begun, not with a single technological breakthrough, but with knowledge transformed into tactical doctrine, engineered into airframe design, and drilled into pilot muscle memory. American fighters were about to stop running from Zeros. They were about to start hunting them. November 9, 1943, Tarawa Atoll, Gilbert Islands. Lieutenant Commander Edward "Butch" O'Hare led his Hellcat squadron toward Tarawa at 15,000 feet, the massive radial engines thrumming with power that still felt almost excessive compared to the fighters they'd replaced. Below, the invasion fleet prepared for the amphibious assault. Above, O'Hare's pilots maintained combat spread formation, pairs separated by tactical distance, each watching his wingman's 6 o'clock. Then the radio crackled. "Bandits inbound. 300s climbing from Tarawa. Angels 12 and rising." 30 against their 12. In the old days, 6 months ago, those odds would have meant retreat, calling for reinforcements, trying to survive until help arrived. Now O'Hare felt something different settling over the squadron. Confidence. "All Wildcats, this is Butch. Maintain altitude advantage. We engage on the dive. Boom and zoom. Nobody turns with these bastards. Acknowledge." 11 voices confirmed in sequence. O'Hare spotted them at 10,000 feet. A swarm of Zeros climbing aggressively, their lightweight frames allowing steep ascent angles no American fighter could match. They expected the usual dance. Americans fleeing or forced into turning dogfights where Japanese maneuverability dominated. They didn't know the rules had changed. Tally-ho! Attacking! O'Hare rolled inverted and pulled, diving nearly vertical with his wingman tucked in tight. The Hellcat accelerated like a falling anvil, 2,000 horsepower and 12,000 pounds of armored fighter screaming toward 350 knots. The Zero formation grew larger in his gun sight, individual aircraft details becoming visible. At 400 yards, O'Hare opened fire. 650 caliber Brownings erupted, converging streams of armor-piercing incendiary rounds tearing through the lead Zero's fuselage. The Japanese fighter disintegrated in a spray of aluminum fragments and burning fuel. O'Hare's Hellcat blasted through the debris, pulling up sharply and extending away before the Zeros could react. Behind him, 11 more Hellcats executed the same lethal geometry. The sky became chaos. Zeros tried to turn into their attackers, banking hard into their legendary tight turns. But the Hellcats weren't there. They'd already extended away at speeds the Zeros couldn't match, climbing back to altitude for another slashing attack. When Zeros tried to follow, their ailerons locked up above 200 knots, leaving them wallowing helplessly while Hellcats repositioned with brutal efficiency. Japanese pilots attempted their classic maneuver, getting behind American fighters and forcing turning dogfights, but Hellcat pairs executed the thack weave flawlessly. When a Zero latched onto one fighter's tail, his wingman crossed behind, putting the Zero directly in his gun sight. The Japanese pilot either broke off or died. Most died. One Zero pilot, more experienced or more desperate, managed to get guns on Lieutenant J.G. Robert Stern's Hellcat. Cannon rounds punched through the wing and fuselage, shredding control surfaces. In a Wildcat or earlier aircraft, those hits would have been fatal. Stearns's Hellcat shuddered, but kept flying. Self-sealing tanks prevented fuel fires. Armor plating stopped rounds from reaching the cockpit. The rugged R2800 engine absorbed damage that would have destroyed a Zero's delicate Sake motor. Stearns reversed hard, rolled right at 280 knots, his hydraulic ailerons responding instantly while his attacker's controls locked solid, and fired a 2-second burst that turned the Zero into burning wreckage. 10 minutes after the first shot, it was over. 30 Zeros had climbed to meet the Hellcats. One Hellcat had been damaged but recovered aboard its carrier. The other 11 suffered minor battle damage or none at all. All 30 Zeros were gone, burning in the ocean, scattered across Tarawa's beaches, or spiraling into the Pacific trailing smoke. O'Hare's radio crackled with voices he'd never heard before. Not fear, not relief, but pure predatory confidence. They can't touch us. Just like the manual said. We own them now. The kill ratio boards updated aboard carriers across the task force. 30.1 for the engagement. In ready rooms throughout the Pacific Fleet, fighter pilots absorbed the numbers with growing realization. The terror was over. The Hellcat worked exactly as promised. The hunters had become the hunted. June 19, 1944, Philippine Sea, west of Guam. The radar operators aboard the carriers watched their screens with growing disbelief. The contacts weren't a raid, they were an airborne invasion. Japanese Admiral Jisaburo Ozawa had launched everything. 370 aircraft from 9 carriers, the largest carrier strike force Japan had assembled since Midway. Zeros, Judys, Jills, and Vals, wave after wave climbing into the morning sky, intent on destroying the American invasion fleet supporting the Marianas landings. On the fleet carriers USS Lexington, Enterprise, Yorktown, and Hornet, Air Group commanders received the contact reports and felt no fear, only anticipation. All fighters, this is Lexington Air Control. Raid count 370 inbound, bearing 270. Distance 80 miles. Vector 270, Angels 20. Good hunting. 220 Hellcats launched in waves, forming a blue wall of American fighters between the Japanese strike and the fleet. In the ready rooms, pilots had stopped checking survival statistics. The Hellcat's combat record spoke for itself. 13.1 kill ratio and climbing. Today would be a massacre. First contact, 10:36 hours. Commander David McCampbell led his squadron into the leading Japanese formation at 20,000 feet. The enemy aircraft seemed to fill the sky, a coordinated mass of fighters and bombers executing textbook fleet attack tactics. Then the Hellcats arrived. McCampbell dove through the zero screen like a meteor, his .650 calibers shredding a Judy dive bomber before it could react. His wingman took a second. Behind them, 40 more Hellcats tore into the formation with systematic brutality. The Japanese had numbers. The Americans had everything else. Hellcats slashed through bomber formations at 350 knots, too fast for Zero escorts to intercept. When Zeros tried to engage, American pilots simply extended away, their superior speed and hydraulic ailerons making pursuit futile. Then they'd reverse, climb back to altitude, and attack again. Boom, zoom, reset, repeat. Japanese bombers fell in burning clusters. Zeros attempting to defend them found themselves outmaneuvered at high speed, outgunned by massed .50 caliber fire, and unable to damage Hellcats even when they managed hits. Armor plating and self-sealing tanks kept American fighters flying through damage that would obliterate Zeros. Second wave, 11:45 hours. Ozawa launched his second strike, 130 aircraft. Fresh Hellcat squadrons met them 60 miles from the fleet. The result was identical. Japanese formations disintegrating under high-speed slashing attacks, Zeros unable to protect their charges, bombers spiraling into the ocean, trailing smoke and flames. Aboard Lexington, Commander McCampbell landed, rearmed, refueled, and launched again within 30 minutes. On his second sortie, he personally destroyed 7 more Japanese aircraft, bringing his daily total to 9. It wasn't skill anymore, it was execution. Third wave, 1,300 hours. The slaughter continued into the afternoon. Japanese strike groups that had launched with 40, 50, 60 aircraft returned to their carriers with 5 or 6 survivors. Pilots reported encounters that defied belief. American fighters that couldn't be shaken, couldn't be damaged, couldn't be escaped. One Zero pilot radioed his carrier. "They are everywhere. We cannot fight them. They are too fast, too strong. It is like fighting tigers with our bare hands." His transmission cut off mid-sentence. Final tally, 1,800 hours. Japan had launched 370 aircraft. 130 returned, most damaged, many crash landing on carriers with battle-damaged aircraft and wounded pilots. American losses, 23 Hellcats. The kill ratio for the single day's action, 10.41. Pilots coined the name immediately. The Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The phrase spread through the fleet within hours. Equal parts dark humor and acknowledgement of what they'd witnessed. Industrial-scale aerial dominance that reduced combat to routine extermination. In the Lexington Ready Room, exhausted pilots stared at the tally boards in silence. They just participated in the most one-sided aerial victory in naval history. Japanese carrier aviation, the force that had terrorized the Pacific for 2.5 years, had effectively ceased to exist. The Hellcat had done exactly what Grumman engineered it to do: hunt Zeros to extinction. By the time Japan surrendered on September 2, 1945, the numbers told a story that seemed almost fictional. The Grumman F6F Hellcat had destroyed 5,223 enemy aircraft in aerial combat, more than any other Allied fighter in history. The final kill ratio stood at 19:1. 19 Japanese aircraft destroyed for every Hellcat lost in air-to-air combat. No other fighter in World War II approached that level of dominance. The Hellcat didn't just win engagements, it erased enemy air power from entire theaters of operation. 305 American naval aviators achieved ace status, 5 or more kills, flying Hellcats. The aircraft produced legends: David McCampbell with 34 victories, Cecil Harris with 24, Eugene Valencia with 23. These weren't outliers. They were representative of what happened when superior training met superior equipment against an outmatched enemy. But the statistical dominance told only part of the story. The real legacy lived in what the Hellcat did to Japanese pilot morale. By late 1944, Japanese aviators began displaying symptoms their commanders called Zero Senshihiro, zero fighter fatigue. Experienced pilots refused combat missions. New pilots froze in their cockpits. The psychological impact of facing Hellcats had become as devastating as the physical destruction. Captured documents revealed the depth of demoralization. One Japanese pilot's diary, recovered from Iwo Jima, described the mental calculus. "We are told to attack the American fighters with courage and spirit, but courage cannot defeat their armor. Spirit cannot outrun their speed. We die bravely, but we still die. Every time. The American Grumman is not just superior. It makes our training irrelevant, our tactics obsolete, our sacrifice meaningless." Another diary entry, found aboard a destroyed carrier, was even more direct. "The Zero was our sword. Now it is our coffin." Japanese commanders attempted to adapt: new tactics, modified aircraft, improved training. Nothing worked. The fundamental equation had shifted irreversibly. Where the Zero sacrificed everything for maneuverability, the Hellcat had balanced speed, protection, firepower, and handling into a weapon system that dominated across every performance metric that mattered in combat. American pilots stopped viewing air combat as survival and started treating it as execution of tactical doctrine. The confidence was palpable in mission reports. Crisp, professional, almost routine descriptions of 4, 6, 8 kills per sortie. The fear that had characterized early Pacific air combat, the dread of facing Zeros, had been completely inverted. The Hellcat's legacy extended beyond kill ratios and psychological warfare. It fundamentally altered naval aviation doctrine. The aircraft proved that carrier fighters didn't need to be lightweight and nimble. They needed to be survivable, powerful, and purpose-built to kill the enemy's best fighter. That philosophy, engineering dominance through systematic exploitation of enemy weaknesses, became the template for American fighter development for decades. The F8F Bearcat, F9F Panther, and eventually the F-14 Tomcat all descended from lessons learned in the Hellcat's DNA. But perhaps the most profound legacy was what the Hellcat represented: the weaponization of intelligence. Eddie Sanders's 90-minute test flight in September 1942 had revealed the Zero's secrets. Grumman engineers had transformed those secrets into engineering specifications. Navy tacticians had converted specifications into doctrine. And American pilots had executed that doctrine with industrial efficiency. Knowledge had become a weapon as decisive as any gun or bomb. The Hellcat wasn't just a great fighter. It was proof that understanding your enemy completely and building specifically to destroy them could alter the trajectory of a war. 19-1. The ratio spoke for itself. The chain of improbabilities stretched across the Pacific like a thread too fragile to bear the weight of history. A single .50 caliber bullet, one round among millions fired that day, struck Tadayoshi Koga's oil line with surgical precision. He might have made Dutch Harbor if the damage had been anywhere else. He might have reached the submarine if he'd chosen a different landing site. He might have survived if the bog had been slightly softer or slightly firmer. Instead, he died instantly, and his aircraft sat preserved in perfect condition. His wingmen might have followed orders and destroyed the downed Zero with machine gun fire. They circled with fingers on triggers, conflicted between duty and compassion. Their mercy, their hope that their friend might somehow survive, saved the aircraft that would doom their air force. Lieutenant William Thies might have flown his patrol route around Akutan Island instead of over it. He might have passed 10 minutes earlier or later when fog obscured the crash site completely. Machinist mate Albert Knack might have been looking anywhere else when that one brief window of visibility opened. Instead, he glanced down at precisely the right moment and saw red circles in the marsh. The recovery team might have found the Zero shattered beyond repair, crushed by impact forces, or swallowed by the bog. Instead, they discovered an intact fighter preserved by the only patch of ground soft enough to cushion but firm enough to support. Eddie Sanders might have played it safe during his test flight, staying within conservative parameters, reporting only what seemed obvious. Instead, he pushed the Zero to its limits and found the cracks in the myth. Aileron lockup, negative G stalls, fragile construction, fabric ballooning. Grumman engineers might have dismissed the intelligence as interesting but irrelevant, their Hellcat design already too far along to modify. Instead, they received Sanders's data at the perfect moment and incorporated every lesson into their fighter's DNA. Navy tacticians might have clung to traditional dogfighting doctrine, trusting pilot skill over systematic exploitation of known weaknesses. Instead, they rewrote the playbook completely. Boom and zoom, energy fighting, the Thack weave, transforming knowledge into tactical doctrine. American pilots might have ignored the new tactics, falling back on instinct and experience in the chaos of combat. Instead, they executed the doctrine with disciplined precision, turning air combat into industrial-scale execution. Each link in the chain was improbable. Together, they were impossible. Yet it happened. A random accident in the Aleutian wilderness became the most valuable intelligence coup of the Pacific War. A dead pilot's aircraft became the blueprint for American aerial dominance. A single test flight became the foundation for a fighter that would destroy over 5,000 enemy aircraft at a 19.1 kill ratio. The Hellcat wasn't just good engineering. It was the weaponization of perfect timing, chance meeting preparation at exactly the moment when knowledge could be transformed into overwhelming tactical advantage. Wars are won by industrial capacity, strategic vision, and soldier courage. But sometimes they're also won by accidents that shouldn't matter, crashes that should have been forgotten, discoveries that required impossible luck, and moments when the right person saw the right thing at exactly the right time. Tadayoshi Koga never knew his final flight would change the course of the Pacific War. His wingmen never knew their compassion would betray their nation's most closely guarded secrets. Eddie Sanders never knew his 90-minute test flight would save thousands of American lives. But together, pilot, wingmen, test pilot, engineers, tacticians, and the pilots who carried their lessons into combat, they transformed a random crash in an Alaskan bog into one of the deadliest fighters in aviation history, the F6F Hellcat. 19-1. Some victories are earned through blood and sacrifice. This one began with an accident, a bullet, and a bog that happened to be exactly soft enough. And from that accident, America built a killing machine,